Everyone. This is Anita Jindal, Senior Director of Engineering at VMware. I would like to welcome you all to today's workshop on Negotiation is Self-Advocacy, How to Ask for More by Lusen Mendel, a candidate coach and YouTuber who specializes in interviewing and negotiation. Lusen's session was very popular last year, and we had to bring them back. Over to you, Lusen, to conduct your session.
Thanks, Anita. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be back here. So my background is in computer science. I graduated from MIT in computer science, went into programming, and over the years became an engineering manager, became a director leading multiple teams. And one of the things I noticed is that employees and candidates often don't know what's going on the other side of the table. Like when you're interviewing, when you're negotiating, when you're asking for a raise. And so I started putting together information to share with people about how to do that. And I want to thank everyone who's already filled out the poll and started asking questions so I can have a heads up. Every question that's been asked so far will get answered in this talk. But feel free to continue asking more, and I'll pause throughout this talk to you see what questions there are and see if we can answer them or if they're coming up. And I'll leave a big chunk of time at the end to really go through any specific situations or questions that you have. So I'm going to share some general tips and kind of pull back that curtain and reveal like what's going on behind the scenes so that you can be more strategic when you're negotiating. But sometimes the devil's in the details. So asking a specific question is always helpful. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so to sort of share some information. Whoops, share screen. All right. So yeah, I'm Lusen Mendel, they pronouns. Let's talk about negotiation and how to reframe it. Someone in the poll, I asked, what holds you back from negotiating? And someone said, I feel like I'm being greedy. And it's not about being greedy. It's about advocating for yourself and understanding the contract, this important life-changing decision that you're about to engage in, this big commitment. There's ways we can reframe that. So I do want to look at some of the ways that people hold themselves back from negotiating so that we can make sure we get past that and kind of reframe how we think about that. And I also want to specifically spend time on figuring out, when are you negotiating? When are you actually doing something else so you can be strategic with what you're doing, at the various parts, points in the process. And then we're going to look at how to kick butt and what phrases that you can say to be more effective. So let's start with what holds us back from negotiating. So one thing is happiness. You get a job offer and you're like, sometimes if you're lucky, you're like, wow, this is wonderful. I want to work for this company. I'm so excited to not be a candidate anymore. I'm so excited to work for these, with these people. Or maybe they give you an offer and it's quite, it actually exceeds your expectations, because sometimes we don't have all the right numbers, going into this. So I'll talk about both of those things, and what to do about that. But just because you're happy now, what we want to prevent is, say, 6 months from now, when you're talking with your coworkers and you're like, wait, you got a signing bonus, or that's how much you earn, or wait, why is my title this, like this, or different things like that. So you want to figure out the situation before you commit and get it all sorted early on, so you don't learn something later that you're less happy about. The other big thing is socialization, that for many people, and we all come from different situations and different socializations, but for some people, we just don't learn the skills, or we're actively taught not to ask for more. Oh, you're being greedy, let the good things come to you. And so the good news here is that negotiation, or really being kind of having this assertive communication, it's just a skill, and you can learn, when and how to apply it. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person for wanting to have these conversations. It's people's jobs, recruiters and managers who, it's like a Tuesday when I'm talking to a candidate about what it's going to be like to join a company. It's not a big deal. But of course, it is a really big deal when you're a candidate and this is maybe only one of 4 conversations you've ever had on the subject. And so that's the third thing, is fear. That this is a new, when we're negotiating, where it's a new situation as candidates, we often, it's like the power dynamic is a little slanted, right? Like you don't have the job yet. You might be worried, are they going to take the offer off the table? Am I going to mess up my relationship with my manager? The good news is usually no. If you go about a negotiation in the right way, in a polite way, in a constructive way, it'll help. It's not going to be a bad thing. It's not going to tarnish your reputation. In my experience as a candidate coach, very seldomly are offers taken off the table because someone negotiates. I'll look at a couple key points where that can happen. And there's always ways, you can decide. Sometimes strategically, you decide, I'm not going to negotiate very hard. We all, it depends on how much risk you want to take. How much runway do you have before you need that income, or other factors to consider. And that's okay. It's okay to be strategic and decide, what, I'm not going to go really hard in this case, but it's a decision you get to make proudly, and not something you're avoiding out of fear. We don't want that to happen. So I want to empower you. The other thing that can happen is bullying. And this really depends on who you're working with. Sometimes if you're in a situation where you're having to work with potentially third-party recruiters who are having a lot of pressure put on them, and they can kind of engage sometimes in not great tactics. Sometimes I work with people and the recruiter will tell them, they'll give them an offer on Wednesday and say, you need to decide by 10 p.m. tonight. I've got people coming in tomorrow. I can't hold this job for you. And that's like a lot of pressure. It's an exploding offer. There's other kinds of tactics like that. And so again, it's important to just figure out, how can I be strategic in this? The situation is not great, but how can I go about this in a way that, I feel good about? And I will say that's the biggest thing about negotiation, is that I can't guarantee you'll get everything that you ask for. But the goal of a negotiation, when you go about it the right way, is that you feel like, at least I asked all the questions that I wanted to ask. And I received this offer in the start of a commitment, of a long-term relationship. We started off on the right foot. And I knew what was on the table and could make the best decision, with the best offer I could have received from this specific situation. That's what a good negotiation can get you. The fifth thing here is that trust. Sometimes we really like our manager. We really like the company. They're not bullying us. They're super nice. And we're like, well, they really care about me and they're trying to do a good thing. I don't need to negotiate here because they're not an adversary. And I can tell you as a manager myself that even when I want the best for my employees or for the candidates I'm working with, my goals are not necessarily aligned with theirs. We all have slightly different goals. And so don't misplace your trust in someone. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask and that you shouldn't try to understand how the salaries work or how promotions work and different factors. So you can, it's okay to have your own goals and your own self-interest. It's always a balance. And then the last point, and this came up in the poll, some of y'all mentioned, you don't know when to negotiate, like when is the right time? And so I just want to review how I think about the candidate pipeline, the candidate process. So the first thing you're doing is you're applying to companies, whether that's an application or you're sending emails to people using your network, whatever it takes to get that interview, that first interview. And maybe not even talking to a recruiter, but if you're going after a more technical role, maybe it's talking to someone who's evaluating your technical abilities, not just like a phone screen where sometimes a recruiter is just trying to figure out. Often in the first step, a recruiter might be trying to figure out, should they spend time on you? Should they invest the time of the rest of the team to interview you? And so there's that little gate between talking to the recruiter and then starting to get interviews. Because once you get interviews, you can impress everyone you talk to, you can do a great job. And then they really want to hire you. They're so invested in you at that point. Once they give you an offer, that's when you're negotiating. That's when you have something to negotiate. They've said, we do want to hire you. Now let's talk. That's when you're negotiating. But back at that first stage, that gate between 1 and 2, when you're applying and you're trying to get that interview so you can prove yourself, they don't know who you are. The commitment is pretty low. And sometimes the recruiter will ask, well, what compensation are you looking for? That's not a negotiation. They just want to know, are you about in the right ballpark so that we can continue spending time on you rather than moving on to another candidate? I hope that makes sense. And so I will talk a little bit at the end about, how you carry on that conversation, but if they ask for your past compensation or what your salary expectations are, but just know that that's not the negotiation. And even sometimes people, if you end up giving away a number and then later you realize, oh no, did I shoot myself in the foot? I said something quite low. And now after all these interviews and I'm starting to get offers, I realize I could have asked for more. It's okay. It's not great to show your hand, but it's okay. By the time you've done all those interviews, again, the best negotiation is a great interview, right? Because then they really want you. That's a little bit of leverage. And so, after by the time you're getting that offer and negotiating, it's possible to say, sometimes they'll even ask you again, what compensation do you want? And you don't have to feel like, oh, I need to explain why I said something. Maybe I said 100,000 when I was applying, but now I realize I could ask for 130. You can just say, I've been doing a bunch of research, talking with recruiters, which hopefully you have been, for other positions and such. You never want to lie, but I've been doing this research, and what I'm looking for right now is more, closer to 130, stuff like that. So you can reset things even if you give a low compensation initially. Okay, we'll go into more tips specifically on that front. And just checking the comments and questions. All right. This is a nice little animation. The most important thing when you're applying to jobs, just never forget, don't let money stand in the way. Like, don't let that compensation question stand in the way of getting to those interviews. Once you get through the interviews and have an offer, then you can negotiate. We'll talk through some of that strategy in a bit, but let's move on. Oh, actually, I'm going to stop the share real quick just so I can make sure to look at the questions and see if there's any. Yeah, are there any?
Okay. No, there are no questions.
Okay, great. Yeah. Feel free to put in questions. I'll make sure to have some more time at the end. In that case, let us go back to how to kick butt in the negotiation. And here we go. This is, of course, the thing that everyone is most interested in is, what do I actually say? How do I actually go about this to be effective and, continue having a positive relationship with someone, even when I'm asking for more? So, and also, like, how do I find those numbers? And, how do I do all this? Okay, here's the first thing is that there's two numbers that I want you to have figured out before you go into a negotiation. That's your minimum, your walk away number, and your happy number. Like, this is what I would like. So between these two numbers, there's now three scenarios, right? Scenario one, they give you something unexpectedly high, and you're like, oh no, what do I do now? The second scenario, which isn't where usually the case, it's sort of above your minimum, but you're like, how do I push that higher? And then what do you do if it's below your minimum? And the thing about these numbers, I'll say, is that, let me actually just talk about process for a little bit. One thing that sometimes when I talk with people, they have a conversation with their recruiter, but they're waiting for the paperwork to negotiate, to like even say what they're looking for. And that's too late usually, especially for tech companies. Often the recruiter or the hiring manager or whoever you're talking to, the person who's going to call you up and say, we're so happy that we can offer you this job. We love talking with you. Here's some details. What do you think? Like, that's usually the best time to negotiate. Doesn't mean you have to decide on the spot, but often, and sometimes it'll happen a different way. They'll give you an email, but then they'll want to talk on the phone. The main thing here is that often people want to have that conversation because drawing up the paperwork can take a little bit of time. They have to get things okayed by various stakeholders in the company. Maybe there's stocks involved, things like that. It doesn't mean that once you get the paperwork, if there's something wrong, you can have another conversation. You can get paperwork fixed. Like, that's their job. It's fine. That's not a big deal. But the best time to negotiate is often that initial conversation. You want to be ready for that conversation where they're like, we want to offer you the job. Hey, we want to check, what are you looking for? Sometimes they'll ask you that. Sometimes they'll just give you some of the high level details. That's the perfect time though, to work through some of those high level details. So that's the negotiation conversation that I'm going to prepare you for. And I know it's scary. I know a lot of people are like, can't I just email them? And email is just not as effective. I have worked with clients who, for various reasons, they just weren't going to have that conversation. And, that's fine. We can work through the email stuff, but it's not going to be as effective. It's easier for those conversations to get drawn out, turn into ghosting. When you come in and when someone sees an email and there's like 10 bullet points of requests, it kind of slows things down, and you want a process that's really forming allies, and it's just easier to work through things in real time as a conversation. The good news is that a negotiation is often a very short conversation. It's really, really intense and stressful, but often it's actually pretty short. And if you have phrases, you can use those phrases. You can even have, I recommend doing practice sessions with a friend or even a pet potentially, just practice saying some of these phrases. You have a script in front of you, and I'll just go ahead and start giving you those phrases and those tips. So we're going to work through each of these 3 scenarios and what to do in each of them. And so we'll start with scenario. Well, actually, what we'll start with is that even when you're negotiating, just don't forget to be positive and excited, and channel that true enthusiasm that you have for this job. And thank you. I'm thrilled to receive this offer. Be positive. Sometimes in popular, media, we see that we see negotiations happening and people are like cagey and like stern and like, don't reveal too much. And in the employment world, that's not how it works. Like recruiters and everyone you're speaking to, they want you to be excited about the job. That's going to help them invest more in you. So even like early on in a process, when recruiters are trying to figure out like, do I want to spend time on this candidate? If they think you're cagey and disinterested, if they think, oh, there's a big chance you're not going to want to get this job, they might think, well, why would I waste time, going through this interview process? And so even for the negotiation, you want that company to think that they're your number one choice and you really want to join. And the only thing that you're just trying to figure out is, well, what's it going to look like? How do we make this decision easier? Or how do we make this decision work? And it's going to be a partnership where you're working with that person, or maybe them directly, maybe someone that they have to go talk to figure out like, how can we make something work, or what's possible? So that's how the negotiation is going to work. They might give you an offer. You don't want to be negative. You don't want to close the door on it. You don't want to say no. I mean, we'll get to some scenarios where you introduce a lot of risk and say no, but typically where you want to start is, okay, here's this offer. Thank you for giving this to me. And now let's look over here. This is what I want to talk about. Let's explore. And that's going to be how the conversation goes. So let's start with scenario 1. Now, this is a great scenario to be in. I've chosen numbers to try to make this easy to talk about and think about. So the happy number is at 100,000, a nice round number. Maybe your minimum is 80. So that's the amount where you're like, you would walk away. And it's okay to have minimums that are, sometimes our minimums are very low. We're like, any job. Maybe I'm early in my career and I'm just trying to open a door so that a year from now, I have a great network, I have great job opportunities, I'm going to grow. Sometimes you're like, well, I currently work a job with a certain minimum, or I have another offer, or, whatever, right? Whatever works for you. Or, have a really big runway. But in this case, let's say our minimum is 80,000. Our happy number is 100,000. That's what we're looking for. And we get an offer that's above that. And I want to address the situation of, what if you don't want to introduce a lot of risk? Maybe this is your only offer. You're going to accept this job. You don't have anything else to accept. You don't have any other leverage. You're like, I need to accept this job. I don't want them to take it off the table, but I'd like to push it a little bit. I'd like to see what's possible. This is a low risk question you can ask. Is there room to negotiate? Because, maybe they'll say, no, we don't negotiate at all at this company, or, sometimes for entry-level positions, it's fixed because they do that all the time and whatever. People have different reasons for whether or not they allow negotiation in this case. And sure, they could be outright lying to you. I don't know, but you're trying to not introduce risk. If they say, no, this is not a negotiable offer, you can be, okay, thanks. That's not a problem. Let's talk about a signing bonus. So I guess I should back up and say, there are many things that you can negotiate about, salary, signing bonus, vacation, stocks, your title, work from home, lots of different things. Usually benefits are not negotiable because that's what they offer at all their employees. Those are usually, big kind of policies. Those are your options basically. And so when you make a decision to work somewhere, you're going to think about the whole package, and not just the financial components, like, who you're working with and what impact you're going to be having and all of those sorts of things, right? But when you're negotiating, it is totally 100% fair to look at one thing at a time and to go through a list where you prioritize whatever's the most important thing, start there. Often it's compensation, salary, because that's, like cash that you get, and raises often, or, things are based on that, bonuses and stuff. So often people start with salary, and then, whatever your second and third and fourth thing, it's up to you, signing bonus, stocks, different things. The reason you want to go one at a time, well, it's just easier to talk about things one at a time. It's less confusing. But then sometimes if maybe you ask for an extra 10,000 in compensation, they can't give that to you. But then they're like, yeah, we could give that to you as a sign-on bonus. Or, sometimes different things are possible as you move down. So that's how you go about that. So you might say, okay, is there room to negotiate? No. Okay, well, let's talk about the next thing. This is, again, a low risk way to go about it. Sometimes they'll say, sure, what were you thinking? Because they've been here before, and they're not going to be like, yeah, actually, we could have offered you 110. They're not going to tell you that. But that's what you want to know, right? You want to know, like, well, what is the max? So they're going to turn it around on you. They're always going to ask you the question, well, okay, what were you thinking? And so you want to come prepared with a number. So you actually need maybe a third number, not just your minimum and you're happy, but maybe, okay, I'm going to add an extra 5,000 if the number's above my happy. So your happy number was 100. They offered you 105. And so now you're like, well, I was thinking closer to 110. Is that possible? And that's a great question. Is that possible? And they might say yes, no, I need to go talk to someone. And, whatever they say, again, if this is a very no risk situation that you don't want to introduce too much risk, just be great. You can just say, great, thank you. And, okay, now let's talk about a signing bonus, just keep moving forward. Here's another thing you can use that's sort of a light phrase. I like round numbers. Can we round up to 110? And I've seen this work now a handful of times, from 90,000 to 100. Just the other day, I was working with someone and she got an offer for 125, rounded that up to 130. Just by asking, to the recruiter, to whomever you're speaking with, these are not big. These are just sort of numbers. They're not necessarily a big deal. It could be a big deal to you though. And so for some people, keeping it light is a nice way to actually make it easier to have this conversation. Sometimes when I work with people, they want to explain like why they're asking for more. Because I'm trying to do this thing, or I'm taking care of these people, and that's all, those are all like very important for you. But I tend to advise people to not try to explain, because they're not very important directly to the person you're talking with. So you don't usually need to explain. You're just asking, is this possible? This is what I'm looking for. This is what my research shows. You don't need to explain your research. I mean, you never want to lie. And if you have, some things that you can present, like, that's great, but you don't need to explain a lot. We'll get to the one case where that can be helpful. So that's a low risk way to negotiate. And so typically, if that's something people do when the offer is sort of above their happy point. Now I want to get into, more like the depths of negotiation. So this is the second scenario where you get an offer, it kind of works, it's above your minimum, but you think you can do better, right? And you're like, I was really hoping for more. And so you get this offer for 90,000, but you're hoping for 100. So what can you say? Here's some things you can say. I'd love to join, but I'm looking at roles around 100,000. And I know this sounds basic, but something that I've noticed some people forget to do when they are negotiating is that they forget to just plainly and directly assert, what are you looking for? You have to say a number. You have to say something in order for there to be a negotiation. This is one way to say it. I'd love to join. Make it clear that you want this to work, but then also make it clear, but we need to figure this part out. We need to figure out some of these numbers. I'm looking for a competitive offer. And for me, that's an offer in the region of 100,000. Other roles I'm looking at seem to be closer to 100,000. Is there any way we can get close to that? That's a great question. How can we work together to make that happen? What's the process here? Do you have to talk to someone? That sort of thing. If they start asking you questions, just remember that you can also ask them questions. If you don't know this already, because some of these questions you might have come up earlier when you were just applying and the recruiter was asking you for your salary range. That might have been the first time you're like, well, what are the salary ranges here? And by the way, you'll notice I usually advise people to just give one number, because when you give a range, the company's going to look at the low number. You start thinking about the high number. That's just a great way to be disappointed. You might as well just be really specific and clear and give one number. These aren't demands. You're not saying I only accept jobs above 100,000. You're just saying, well, this is what I'm looking for, stuff in this region. So that's why I like to give one number. I'm also, by the way, not addressing a situation where you have leverage. I mean, that makes a negotiation super easy. If you get an offer from another company that's for 130,000 and they offer you, 90, it's really easy to say, look, I would love to join your company. You're my number one pick. This, your work culture, your technology, this is really what I'm looking for. But I have this other offer, for substantially more. Like you tell them some of the details, and you say, hey, what can we do to make this, an easier decision? That's usually a very straightforward case, right? Certainly do ask questions in the Q&A if you have a more nuanced situation in that area. But I'm mostly giving phrases that people can use when you feel like you don't really have leverage. By the way, I should also say, being currently employed somewhere is still a kind of leverage. Never tell the new companies that you're interviewing with that you're like deeply unhappy, right? Like as far as they're concerned, you are happily employed somewhere. You're looking for your next step forward. Your next, you'd like to level up or, have a better impact or whatever. You're really excited about this company because it's pulling you forward, but you could always decide to stay where you are. So your current situation can also be a kind of leverage that they have to at least do a little bit better than that. So, always be positive. They don't need to know how unhappy you are. You probably aren't happy. That's why you're looking, but, okay. So, oops. Given the responsibilities of this role, I think that something around 100,000 would be a fair market rate. This is a nice phrase. I've worked with someone, sometimes when you're interviewing, especially as you get into management or more senior positions where you're being leveled through the interview process, and the leveling or the job responsibilities can change. And so sometimes by the time you get to negotiation, you have to kind of remind the recruiter who maybe you only talked with at the beginning of the process, actually, here's where we've ended up. And like, let's make sure that the compensation or the contract sort of matches that. Like maybe through the interview process, you came in and they realized, oh, you have all this mentoring experience you can give or some specific expertise. So this is one time where I do think it can be really useful to explain why you maybe would ask for more. You're bringing some specific testing expertise, or you're actually going to be now managing people, stuff like that. Okay, here's another phrase, kind of classic negotiation. That's a little lower than I was expecting. And that's, by the way, is maybe as negative as you want to be about a offer without the recruiter thinking like, oh, you're closing the door. That's a little lower than I was expecting. I was thinking closer to 100. Can we meet in the middle? Classic negotiation phrase. Okay, here's the thing. I want to tell you a phrase that is way better than meeting in the middle. And it's the kind of phrase that you could practice this maybe for a week, every night, right before you brush your teeth. Say this phrase. Stick a toothbrush in your mouth so you don't say anything else afterwards, and you let them kind of practice having silence afterwards. Let them say something. The phrase is, how high can you go? So whenever someone tells you, oh, we can't go that high, or we don't do that, this for compensation or for whatever you're negotiating, ask them bluntly, well, how high can you go? Because that's what you want to know. And you're not, we're often socialized to think, oh, we're putting them in a really uncomfortable situation. Again, for most people on the other side of the table at a job, like this is just a Tuesday for them, and it's okay. They can handle it. Like they know how to say no. They know how to not answer your question or avoid the question or whatever, right? Like you're not the first person to ask this. So like, you're not trying to be disrespectful or impolite, but you don't need to go, flip over backwards thinking about their feelings here, right? Like this is their job, and this is a totally fair question that you're trying to figure out. How high can you go? Or why can't we do both of these things? Or what is the reasoning for this? Or like, am I leveled correctly? What does this level mean? You can ask all the questions you want to ask. Okay, that's the best part of negotiating, is that you get to ask the questions and figure out, because you want to understand this important life-changing commitment you're about to make. And that's totally cool. And that's also why it's better to do it as a conversation than an email, because you get all that back and forth, right? And they get to see your tone and how polite you're being and all of that. Okay. A quick note about scenario 2 is that sometimes our happy numbers and our minimums are quite far apart. And this can especially happen with more senior roles, or with certain, especially in tech, there's some jobs like DevOps used to be like this, where just the salaries are all over the map. Developer relations is definitely like that right now. And so sometimes like your minimum say is 100,000, your happy number is 180. And, what if the offer is 120? Are you going to tell someone, well, actually, I was more so looking at jobs around 180. Maybe that big jump, I have seen this happen before. If the jump is too big, the response might just be, well, we don't want to hire you if you're going to be like that on, like, we can't meet that. And now you're just going to be like really unhappy here. And so they rescind the offer in a sense. I mean, if you're in a conversation, you can clarify, but that's not a good place to be, right? And so it really depends. I mean, I've worked with some people who, some situations where there are just big jumps. And if you're really talking to, like, say, your manager and sort of able to really have that conversation, you can kind of navigate this. And really clarify responsibilities is often one of the big reasons. Like, leveling really comes into some of the reasonings behind all this. But yeah, if you really are just taken by surprise, something that can be good to do is to just have a reset and to say, look, if there's a really big gap, what I'm really going to negotiate for is, like, pick a number, ahead of time, 20,000 above the offer, so that it's not a big jump, so that it's like a little bit more reasonable. So that can sometimes, so you then apply all the same phrases that we talked about before. You've just basically reset your happy number if there's a really big range. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the end game. Not a little bit, like, this is the important part, is like, how do you leave this this negotiation conversation in a way that's going to move things forward in a good way? Because there's only so much. Oh, yes.
There are quite a few questions on the previous one, so should we address them now?
Yeah, let's do that.
I can go through one at a time. Okay. The first one is, how do you initiate the negotiation?
Oh, great. Sorry, let me pull back. Sorry, I'm a visual person. These are from the Q&A?
Yes, they are.
Let me just mark some of these as answered that I think have been answered.
I can do that if you can just answer the questions.
Okay, sorry. What is the question?
How to initiate the negotiation?
Oh, how do you initiate it?
Yes.
Oh, this can happen sometimes, right? Where you're speaking with like the recruiter, or someone calls you and they're like, oh, we're so excited that we'd like to, offer you this job, and here's all the benefits, and what start date would you like? They kind of just like skip forward and don't bring up, like, does the offer sound okay? And maybe at best we could say, like, oh, they're just really excited, and they're not, they're just not thinking about that. Maybe it's also a tactic to, like, oh, let's see if we could skip through that part. So in those cases, first of all, when you are in these conversations, you never have to decide on the spot. If it's not your policy right now, make this your policy, to never make life-changing decisions without sleeping on it, or without talking to a family member or something, right? So you can just say, you can have this great conversation. You can be really polite, or really positive, but that doesn't mean you have to say yes or no, right? Like, doesn't mean you have to make a decision. You can always say, oh, this is really great, I'm so excited, but it's not my policy to make this, big decisions like this without whatever. That's totally reasonable. And so, but ideally, even so, that gives you more time. You could then later come back to them and have another conversation and say, oh, I'm really excited, I just have some questions. But honestly, if you can, in that moment, when given an offer, especially verbally, to basically then have the negotiation, say, oh, I'm thrilled about this, but I was actually thinking, what about over here? And so by the time you're starting to do by the time you're going through on-sites, you actually want to have your minimum and happy numbers ready. Because sometimes even you'll do an on-site, and at the end, the hiring manager will do a quick check-in with you and say, oh, what were you looking for? Or, you just want to be ready, and definitely ready for that phone call. And sometimes it's not a phone call, right? Sometimes the company is going to send you this email, and maybe they're not making space to even talk on the phone. If you ever do get an offer, I recommend, as much as possible, saying, just writing, keeping your email short, and thanks, this is so exciting. Can I call you tonight? Or, like, what would be a good time to chat as soon as possible, or whatever. You don't have to rush it if you don't want to. It kind of depends on what other timelines with other jobs you're trying to sort of match up. So that's my advice for that, is to ask for the negotiation, to just know really solidly in your mind, I want to be able to ask questions about this. I want to at least be able to ask, is this negotiable? If not, assert, that you're looking for more.
Okay. The second question is, how do you deal with an email offer versus a phone offer?
I would say, if you're getting an email offer, that's very nice to get the information in that way. Ask for the phone call. I mean, if they don't want to chat with you on the phone, we're all in different situations and different industries, and geographies work in different ways. There's different cultural ways things work. So, all you can ever do is ask with a company. You generally are have much less power, but try to get the phone call. Just try to ask.
Okay. The third question is, to better understand the ballpark of the role and pay, what are some useful sites or tools you can suggest or we can use for benchmark? Or if you are covering this as part of the presentation, we can answer that later. So they're asking for the tools they can use for understanding.
Yeah, I go into that now.
Scales. Okay.
Yeah. I think there's a few different sources you can use. One is, go online, look on Glassdoor, levels.fyi. There's different places where you can go where people have shared salaries. Take those with a grain of salt. Depends on, if you're going to a really large company where a lot of people are reporting, maybe you can get a good idea. But often, like, every company is kind of this weird snowflake, right? Where it's like, okay, it's this big, but it's in this location, and I'm in this industry, and like I'm at this level, and you're like trying to put all this like math together, and it's all really specific, and seldom can you find like the exact like other person to like match for that. So do your research, go to like Glassdoor, levels.fyi, join communities, Slack, join professional groups where people are sometimes sharing information, collating spreadsheets, talk to your own network, do a backdoor reference. Companies do references for you, sometimes a backdoor reference, which means they go and ask someone that isn't your official reference that you submitted to them. If you're going to go get a job at Netflix, if you have a friend who works there, go ask your friend, like, how do salaries work? Did you get a signing bonus? Like, they don't have to give you their exact numbers. They could give you ranges. Like, you can try to get more information that way. But at the end of the day, like, if you're trying to go work somewhere, a lot of things are very specific. Like the company is specific, your role is specific, everything's specific. So one little trick that I actually quite like is go find companies that publish their salaries, their compensation, like all of it publicly. I think GitLab does this. There's companies where they'll say, like, here's what everyone earns, and that you can see the calculator. You can be like, okay, if it's a senior engineer, but they're living in Seattle versus Florida, like, this is the percent difference. This is the percent difference from, senior to mid or something like that. Excuse me. And then the point is, okay, you're not trying to work at GitLab, so those numbers aren't right for you, but it shows you the math. And so then you can kind of use that to apply other numbers you're getting to your specific situation.
Okay. So Lusen, I'll let you get back to the presentation. There are still more questions. We'll pick them up.
Okay.
After your
yeah, and we're doing fine on the presentation time.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
And thanks everyone. Those were great questions. Okay, let's get into the end game. So we're gonna go through the end game. We'll go through asking for a raise, and we'll go through talking with recruiters early in the process. And then I'll go back to other questions. So here we go. End game. Okay, end game. This is how do you wrap up the conversation? And this is important, right? Because I don't know how many times I've been working with someone, and they have that negotiation with the person, with the recruiter, with whomever. Sometimes it's a director, whatever, the person, and the person says, we don't make exceptions. Like, you've asked for 100,000, but we pay everyone 90,000. We don't make exceptions, or we don't give people like an extra week of vacation, or like whatever it is. Okay, you have that conversation. 2 days later, that recruiter comes back and says, you know what? we have made an exception. And, I'm not saying that's a good way. And, this isn't maybe the most fair system to exist, but if there are going to be exceptions, why not you? So how do you open that door? That's part of the end game. So in scenario 2 or 2B, you got an offer, you've negotiated it up above your minimum. You still like a little bit more. Here's how you want to end that conversation. Because maybe they were like, okay, you've asked for 140, but we're offering 120. The recruiter might say, I have to go talk to the director of engineering. Like I have to go talk to someone else to see what's possible. That's a common thing, maybe that they can't do. So they can't like figure that out right during the conversation. Okay. So you're like, okay, well, what you would say, what we've talked about sounds great. I'm excited to join, pending review of the details in the written offer. And you might want to specifically say, I look forward to hearing back. Like I understand you need to talk with the director or the VP or whatever, like I look forward to hearing back. And you want to communicate. I mean, as a candidate, you always want to be communicating a lot, especially at this point when you're negotiating. You want this to be like faster is your friend. It introduces risk every time things get drawn out, because the more time that passes, their budget changes or another candidate comes through. I'm not saying that you have to be overly worried about that. They're not, their intentions usually are good, and people usually are so thrilled when they're hiring a candidate, and different companies have different timelines. But that said, if this company really is your first choice, and you really do want to join, if we can, work things out, you want there to be a certain momentum to carry through. And so 24 to 48 hours, you want to be in communication like around that time frame. If you have other offers, say you're interviewing at other companies, maybe this isn't totally your first choice. Like it's fine. You're channeling, you're shining that light on the reason you're excited for this job when you talk to them, but you're interviewing elsewhere because you're not a fool. And you're a full human trying to be strategic here, and you've got other interviews going, but they haven't given you offers yet. If you're trying to slow someone down, I recommend actually trying to speed up those other places and saying, you're my number one choice. Like, I'm really interested in working for you, but like, I've already got an offer here. Can we do this on site? Like tomorrow, can we make this faster? Only when you really, again, because it kind of introduces a little bit of risk, but only, when you really need to, would you go to that first place? You'd almost even find other reasons to say, I need to talk this through over the weekend. Can we, wait until like next week? Slow them down without saying, hey, I'm actually just waiting for other places to get back to me. Again, it kind of depends. Some companies, like some of the bigger companies that have like 4-month-long processes, sometimes I've worked with people and they've already from the get-go talked to the recruiter about how they're interviewing at like Facebook and Amazon, and like they just like put it all on the table, and maybe that's fine. Kind of depends. For smaller companies where there is like the sense of like very specific passion, you may not want to introduce that like concept so specifically. But okay, so in terms of the end game, you may want to say, thanks, I look forward to reviewing the details. And you may want to reference like, I look forward to hearing back, about whether X, Y, or Z is possible. Like whatever you've just discussed, like make a game plan, basically. I also just want to say, if you really are excited about the offer, you can accept then and there. You can just be like, awesome, I accept. It is always the case that when you review the written details, because that's very common in tech companies, is that you have this as a conversation and then they like send you an employment contract later. You can always review that. And if there's something that's wrong, or sometimes they bring up, non-competes or like different topics that are more specific you didn't talk about at the high level, you can always just say, hey, I need to have I have questions about this, or actually maybe you give it, you have a lawyer review it. I don't know. I mean, it depends. Not every contract is going to be totally changeable, but of course, if there's something wrong there, you can correct it. I've worked with some people, or I've done these talks where sometimes people ask like, oh, I would never negotiate until I have the written offer. In my experience, companies are not trying to fool you. Like they're not trying to say something verbally and then like behind your back, like give you a different written offer. Like do the negotiation up front. It's totally fine. If a mistake is in writing, you get it fixed. That's not a problem. Again, make this your policy. This looks great. Thanks for this offer. I'm so excited. It's my policy to never make big life-changing decisions without sleeping on it first. I'll call, and then, make a time or a date when you'll get back to them. This is because sometimes it really can feel in these conversations like you're being pressured to accept or move forward. Because when we're being positive, again, it can really feel like we've just said yes. Being positive does not mean you're saying yes, right? Does not mean a decision. So give yourself space to make a decision, space for other offers to come through, or space for them to go work on your behalf and give you that exception, or just to go talk to someone. This is another thing you can do. I need to discuss it with my family or my partner or something. Okay. Sometimes you need to be a little more specific. Like you're like, no, I need you to do a little bit of work. Not like I need you. You're not saying I don't accept this offer. This is, again, we're still in scenario 2, where it's like, you are going to accept this, but you want to make it clear, like, it's not great. You're like, I've asked for more, right? So this role is at the top of my list, but I'll need to think about 110 and get back to you tomorrow. Like you can let them know, I'm not sure, I need to think about it. You could even directly remind them, of the conversation. Okay, I think you guys get the point. You have this conversation. Sometimes you need to make sure to like refer to that at the very end, right? Okay, here's really the most important, or the hardest scenario is scenario 3, where the offer is below your minimum. And the reason I don't get to this until the end game is that at the start, if this is what happens, well, you just treat it like scenario 2. Don't tell them your minimum. Just say, oh, I've been looking at jobs closer to 110. Is that possible? See what happens, right? Because maybe you negotiate, bam, it's above your minimum, maybe even, higher than your exact minimum. Like, that's great, right? Like, good job. That's awesome. But if you end the conversation and the offer is, you're not going to accept the offer, you can't end that conversation and say, wow, this is fantastic. Look forward to hearing back from you. The recruiter might be like, yeah, I look forward to hearing back from you too. I hope you accept. Like they don't know that they have to do work for you. So you cannot leave this situation. You cannot leave the conversation without saying something specific. This introduces a ton of risk, but like you already know that. You already know, hey, my minimum was 100. Like this does not meet my minimum. So here's what you might want to say. I would love to join, but I can't at that number. You basically have to tell the recruiter, this doesn't work for me. It's another great phrase. Like, I'm really excited about this role, but 90,000 doesn't work for me. Also a great phrase to use with your manager if you're having a really tough situation. It doesn't work for me can be a really nice way to open a door to more, to like, talking things through, right? But you have to tell the recruiter, whoever you're talking with, hey, this doesn't work. Like, you need to go and like figure something out, or otherwise this is no. So it introduces risk, because they might just be like, oh, I guess it doesn't work, and you might never hear from them again. Rather than offers getting rescinded, I would say in the last 5 years, it's ghosting is kind of more often what happens, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, you don't want that to happen. So you have to say something, and then maybe they'll like really get the picture, and maybe not. Maybe you lose this opportunity. Okay. Are there any questions specifically on that section, or should I go into how to negotiate a raise?
There is one on this particular section. It is about the scenario 2.
Oh, let's do it.
But I am looking at the rules around 100,000. Won't the recruiter wonder why at the beginning I did not say the 100,000 number?
Like you mean like during the
Beginning
sort of application phone screen phase?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, I guess they might wonder. I mean, that doesn't, you're moving forward. They might wonder that. It's fine. If they ask you like, oh, why didn't you say this sooner? You can say, oh, I'm, yeah, no, this is based on my conversations with other recruiters as I've been interviewing. This is what I've learned, and this is what I'm, looking for. So you can just be honest about that. When I say talking with other recruiters, I mean, again, you never want to lie. And if you only are going through a single interview process, a single job opportunity, that's limiting, and that's fine. Sometimes I've done that. I'm like, oh, I just want this one company and we'll see if it works. But ideally you're at least maybe talking to other recruiters through LinkedIn, through friends of yours. Maybe whoever was your last recruiter, maybe not at the current job you're at, but hey, can I just have a chat? Can I just pick your brain about where the industry is at? Like there's tons of ways to sort of get information and make the statement, I've been talking with other recruiters, not a complete lie. You're also not trying to like, this isn't about making them like afraid or like, you're not trying to do this in a negative way, but I think it's fair to be like, I've just been doing research and talking to people, and this is what it seems to be. I mean, again, if you are in an interview process with multiple companies, then you have actual information about other opportunities that you are at least in the running for, and what those roles are. Like that, be real with it. If you can get real data, anytime you're interviewing somewhere, ask that recruiter, what's the salary range? And a lot of places they do have to tell you. There's a link in one of my videos. I go into details about this, but in some states, like in California, for example, they have to honor a reasonable request by a candidate. If you're a candidate and you want to know, like, what is the salary range for this role, companies need to tell you that. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'll move on.
Yeah. Okay. I just have one more question, which is related to this section.
Sure.
Where would you recommend setting the minimum and happy salary levels? For example, at 10% or 10K, or some guidance around there?
Oh, that's really tough because it can really be all over. There's the good news is that no number is wrong. I mean, every number is very personal. It's like you're the one who has to live with them. There's no right or wrong answer. I know that's not helpful. I mean, most people, at the end of the day, most people are like, I want to earn something commensurate with like other people at my company at the very least. That's fair for working at this company. And maybe if you have a more, broader goals, you might not be company dependent, but yeah, it really depends. I mean, but when I think of like all the different sort of tech positions, tech adjacent, software, hardware, startups to big companies, like salaries are really all over the place. Yeah. If money is like if you really want to maximize your money, go work at companies that are really successful and have lots of money to spend. That's like one of the easiest ways to get more money. Working for nonprofits, when they don't have a lot of money, you don't have as many options. Working for companies that don't have a lot of growth, like in terms of promotions, and that those, promotions are one of the best ways to get more money too. But yeah, in terms of, yes, the minimum and happy can be, usually what happens is the minimum can be quite low. Like almost like, I mean, if you don't have if someone's unemployed, a lot of times people are like, my minimum is kind of like not there. I mean, it's a matter of pride, right? But if you don't have other offers coming in, what's pride worth to you? Not paying the rent. So anyway, yeah, I don't have any guidance for where those should be. Yeah.
Those were all with respect to the previous section.
Okay, great. Let's talk about negotiating a raise, because I get that sometimes, and I'm gonna so I have a video all about how to negotiate, how to ask for a raise. Because here's the thing, it's a conversation, it's not a negotiation. As soon as you join a company, you lose all of your leverage. Like at the very least, when you're a candidate, even if you don't have any other leverage, you're unemployed, you're going to accept whatever job you can in the next, 3 days. Like you're literally at like the least leverage situation that you can be in. You still, I mean, as far as they know, you still get to say yes or no. Like you still can't decide whether to go there or not. That's the whole reason that there's a negotiation at all. When you're an employee, you don't have any leverage. You're working there. If you ask your manager for something and they don't give it to you, you still got to work there and do your work, right? It's a conversation. So as an employee, you don't have leverage, and this changes everything. I think in a lot of ways, it can be a good thing though, in that what it is that you have a relationship with your manager, and you're going to ask for something, and based on the quality of this relationship and the general like set of policies and culture and relationships above your manager, that's going to determine what happens. And also, the financial health of the company, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to say, it's good to be mindful of companies like budgets and financial health. It's not an excuse. Like their problems are not your problems. You can still ask for money, even if you think the company's having a hard time. that's totally fine. You probably should still do that. But it's always good to just know like strategically what's going on. So you can ask for a raise. If you're asking for a raise, bullet points are helpful because your manager probably has to then ask, like pass it up the chain and talk to their manager about why Luce is asking for a raise. So if you can have some bullet points, that'll be more effective. It lets them know you're serious. It gives them like ammunition to say like, look at all the great things this employee has been doing. So it makes that faster. Be really like growth oriented. It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to be forward looking. I think it's lovely when employees want to know how to have a bigger impact, how to grow their career. And having a bigger impact often means like becoming more senior, which often means raises and promotions, right? And doing more work. Don't be bitter about the past, especially if you learn getting raises based on like performance and growth. That often happens at set times. If you've learned that someone else at your company, earns more than you, and you feel like some bad decisions have been made about your situation, it's good to bring it up. It's even good to say, what about back pay? If mistakes were really made, let's get this fixed. Hey, can we get it fixed for the whole past year where this was wrong or this was unfair or something? You can always ask. But being kind of bitter or being too much looking at a past problem, it can be really hard for your manager to get on board and to be able to like advocate for you clearly. Do try to get things that are, if there's an issue where you haven't been compensated fairly, and this is not about performance, sometimes you can get that fixed out of cycle, kind of like when that happens. Try to separate that from performance increases. Those are two different things, and you deserve both. You deserve to be compensated fairly, and then you deserve performance increases. So yeah, don't be bitter about stuff. The thing that often happens is that by the time people are asking for a raise, it's too late. So if you're waiting until your manager gives you a performance review, it is way too late to then ask them for a raise. You should still ask them for a raise. Better late than never. And also, places work differently, right? Who knows? But often as a manager, I'm often like months ahead of a performance review. I've already been talking with my manager about how so-and-so has been on, stepping up and taking on these extra responsibilities and crushing it. And like, I've already been like setting the foundation to then give someone a promotion or to, a raise or whatever. And usually there's like stuff managers are doing behind the scenes while or even before you're doing a self-eval. We're already like meeting with our teams and like filling out like quadrants or whatever, whatever the process is at the place where you work. Like we usually know this before we've seen your self-eval. So don't wait for the conversation after all of that to then ask for a raise. It's way too late. But the good news is that even if you can't get a raise right now because your manager is like, already like allocated all of the things, or maybe the managers didn't realize, they just were like, I thought you were happy chugging along. Even managers where, I try to get all of my employees to ask for raises because like it's good practice. It's good for all of us, for everyone to do it, because if only 2 people do it out of a team of say 5, those other 3 are often just, even a well-intentioned manager will just let people, sit there. It's like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So, or maybe there were issues. Sometimes managers don't give negative feedback. It can be difficult. And maybe you're not, doing things that are impressing them or moving you forward, or they don't, whatever is happening, they're not giving you the assignments that are more interesting. And that is holding you back, but you don't know it yet. So good news is better late than never. Whenever you do ask for a raise or for something with your manager and they can't give it to you, because it's a relationship, a long-term relationship, find out what the situation is and make a plan and have regular check-ins. So if someone came to me and they wanted a raise and I was like, actually, you're not ready, let's go through this job description and let's look at these things. But maybe it's like in 6 months, right? Like make a plan. And that's great. And at some companies, it just never materializes. Like every 6 months, there's another excuse. You can have a plan that can eventually turn to, getting leverage or, looking at other opportunities. And so that's the situation where you try to get an offer from another company. You want to be careful about doing this because at some companies, maybe you're at 70,000, you're like, wow, the market's moved up to 100,000. You ask your manager for this $30,000 raise, $30,000 raise, and they're like, we can't do that. That's crazy. We only give 3% raises or whatever. But then if you come back with another offer suddenly like that, they're like, great, here's your $100,000, new salary. So, which kind of, it's like a weird reward incentive system. Other companies, you tell your manager you're interviewing elsewhere or that you've got another offer, and they're like, oh, you're disloyal. Like you're, maybe they let you go around that. Or, more so like sometimes they'll just stop investing in you and they'll give the bigger responsibilities to other people that they perceive to be more committed. And some of this is, is this policy, is this culture? I'm not saying all of this is a good thing, but before you go out and get another offer, maybe talk to other people at the company and just sort of suss out, like, is there an official policy or just like what culturally might be expected to happen here? Because you have to be, it's kind of a big thing to say that, oh, I've been interviewing somewhere else enough to have an offer. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about, I just want to go back to the beginning of the candidate process, talking about past compensation or desired compensation early in a process before you've done a bunch of interviews, because this can come up early on and it feels like it can impact. I have a couple of videos about this. It can impact your negotiation later, but also, again, I want to say it's not the biggest deal in the world. When you're in the application phase, your most important goal is to get those interviews. And depending on how much risk and leverage and whatever the nature of the situation is, nothing's going to be totally destroying if you can move forward to those interviews, you can, continue to move forward and impress them. You can always have a conversation that then kind of resets things. Okay. That said, how do we go about this in the best way? So if someone asks you for your past or like current compensation, first of all, in some states, they're not supposed to do that. It's now against the law. There's a link which we can, I think these slides will get shared afterwards so that you can go here, or you do a Google search. There's like lists of by state, what the different laws are around topics like this. So for example, in California, companies can't ask you what you've earned, like what you've actually, last earned. But let's say because of where you're at, or, people in different situations sometimes still get asked this. So first check, is this legal or not? One thing you can always do is say, maybe you're working somewhere currently and they're like, hey, what are you earning right now? And you can be like, you know what, my contract doesn't allow me to disclose that publicly. And so it's important to me that I'm, good for my word. So I'd rather not say. You can also say, even if they push you, you can be like, I'm really uncomfortable. Let me just, go and check. Let me just I'll, after this conversation, go and check about that and get back to you. But I'm, really excited about this position. I'd really like to move forward. I do not think compensation is a problem. Like, move the conversation to getting that interview. And of course, just never get back to them about this because it's a dumb question. So just really try to move forward. You can also, again, I don't think you should ever lie as a candidate, because often when that's discovered, even if it's fairly benign, that'll like end the employment like opportunity for you. But that said, you could decide, you know what, this is a really dumb question. They shouldn't be asking that. It's an unethical question almost. It's an unfair type, question. It's not good for, equity. What they really should be asking is for my desired compensation, because that is reasonable for recruiters and for you to know if this is like worth investing all this time in. So you could just give that number instead. Again, depends on how much in your industry, does a reference check? Will they ask your manager exactly how much you're earning currently? I don't know. I think for many states these days, this is starting to be like not a route that people aren't usually asking this. And also you could decide to tell the truth. Again, the world's not going to end if you tell the truth. It's a crappy question. It sucks that they've asked it. You might decide, I'm just going to answer it and move forward. That's also fine. Again, it reveals something about your hand by the time you get to negotiation. But again, the best negotiation is killer interviews, other offers, you can reset things based on your, the research you've done. So it's all good. How do you talk about desired compensation? I have a video about that. And the short of it is, whenever you're asked a question, it's fair for you to ask a question back. That's one of my favorite negotiation strategies, to like slow things down, to get more data. I mean, I talked earlier about how do you find numbers, but one of the best sources of numbers for a particular job is the recruiters, the people who are involved with that job. Ask them what the range is, or what they think. Even if they don't, maybe a lot of places don't have like official policies, or they don't have their things together, but just ask them to guess. It's totally reasonable. And then if they tell you something, 100 to 120,000, pick the high numbers. Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm looking at jobs around 120,000. I mean, to get, again, at the early stages, to get through to the interview, you just want to be enough of a fit where they feel like, yeah, let's invest time in this interview to see if this can actually work out. You're just trying to get to the next level. So you mostly just want to be within that range, right? Of course, try to avoid saying a number. Again, I do think if you ask for a range and you say, oh, great, the top of that range looks good. And then by the time you get to negotiation, right, again, you can reset that, you can push that higher if for all those reasons I've listed. It's not a big deal, but yeah, try to avoid. I would say, I'm looking for a competitive offer. I'm still researching. But you don't want to be cagey here. If being cagey here means you don't get the interview, you've messed up, right? Like you've closed the door 100%, which I think is typically not what you want to do. You want to let them close the doors. You want to keep doors open, right? So you can say, I'm still talking with recruiters and doing research, but for now, and then, say a high number sounds reasonable and I'd love to interview. Try to be realistic. It really depends. Sometimes I talk to people who they're like, their expectations are so much lower than market, and I'm having to like pull them up. And sometimes I talk to people and I'm like, let's see if we can get a job offer in that range, because that feels unrealistic. And the truth, we'll know the truth by getting an offer, right? That's the truth. Sometimes for forms, sometimes people are filling out forms and you have to enter a number about what your desired compensation is. Again, you can tell the truth, you can put a number in there, but especially since you can't kind of like couch it in other things, it can seem really final, right? And if you really don't know what to put in there, you can put in $1, like put in something to move forward that is going to work for automated systems. It's a lie, but it's an obvious lie. So this could be a gamble. Maybe someone looks at that and is like, oh, this is weird. But maybe if it's going through an automated system and then you're talking to a recruiter and they're later like, wait, what is this? And you'd be like, oh yeah, I just was like doing a lot of research and I just really wasn't sure. And I wanted to ask you these questions. So again, that can help. That's the end of the presentation I have. And I'd like to get back to some of these great questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions is, what kind of bullet points can I highlight if it is not about performance? This goes back to your presentation.
Oh, well, I mean, bullet points about performance are like really great, like, impact on the company and on clients, or users, your coworkers, go look at job descriptions or, internal role descriptions and try to like not only meet those, but especially if you're like trying to get to the next level, like, is there anything you're doing towards that next level, which is often around, impact on others or dealing with more complex systems. Anyway, so bullet points are really around like performance and impact and job description-y stuff are like usually ideal. And 4 or 5 is often good. And if it's not, sometimes people say like, oh, make it about like money you're saving in the business and etc. But if you don't have like those sorts of numbers, even maybe you're in like a more customer support role, if there's like things that people are saying about you that are nice, like, include that. Like anecdotes are also great. Okay, but if it's not performance, as in you just realized you joined the same week as someone else from a coding boot camp and they started with $10,000 more than you. This is a real case that I run into with someone. And you're like, they had like the very similar backgrounds. They graduated from the same coding school. Someone started more. This happened to be, that person was a man, the other person was a woman. She was like, wait a second. So after a year, she was like, I want to be how do we fix this? I don't think that was a bullet point conversation. Well, maybe the bullet point was writing down, here's what I've noticed. And I'm just wondering if there's something if this sounds right to you and if there's something we can do about it. But then that was maybe the 2 bullet points, and then it was a conversation.
Okay. The next question is, when is it the right time to ask for a raise when you start a role?
When is the right time? I would say at the beginning. And you can couch this in when you first join a company, you want to understand like how things work here. What are my job responsibilities right now? What am I working towards? What are my goals? And not just like, what are my goals in terms of contributions, but I think it's totally fair to say, I'm interested in progressing my career and having a bigger impact and getting whatever that next level is, and like being really specific, like what does it take to get to this next level, and having regular check-ins so that 6 months, a year in advance, you always know what you're at the next performance review. You should know whether you're looking for a raise or a promotion or whatnot. And sometimes, early in your career, you might get a raise, say when you're entry level, often after the first year, maybe 2 years, you're going to get a raise. But as you become more senior, those are going to happen less frequently. And that's normal. But you should always know what you're working towards. And as a manager, different companies work different ways. So it's also great to just ask, because maybe you want to understand how things work, whether you want to be a manager or not. It's always great to know how things work. I will just say, sometimes when there's a salary range, if someone is below the midpoint, often they're working towards raises. And once you're above that midpoint, you're working towards a promotion, just as like a little shorthand.
Okay. Here's a question from somebody. A friend recently found out that she was lowest paid person in her old team, even though she was highest performance and managed 10 times more than her colleagues. She applied for and got a new position in the company. She negotiated an 8% raise based on her old salary, but she now understands she's being underpaid for the role. What advice would you give her to renegotiate?
Yeah. Oh, this is tough. Often when I'm working with people, it's when they've already tried talking to the company and they're like, I need to just move somewhere else. And then the good news is, you can find a new company that it's not just about earning more money. It's about feeling like they're, valuing your contributions and your career progression and all of that. I think I'm a little bit of a visual person, so I'm not sure I understood all the details. So if I get something wrong, Anita, please correct me. But here's what I'll say for this is that primarily it just has to be that conversation. So whether or not this will get resolved is going to be based on that relationship and conversation that she has with her manager, and then what that manager is able to accomplish based on the company's policies or culture or whatnot. So
okay,
if I understand correctly, it's that she's doing very well and has received promotions, but she's paid less than other people.
Yes, she's underpaid. Yes,
she's underpaid. So
yeah,
you have to bring it up and see if they can resolve this, and what that timeline. Basically, often you get kind of a timeline, and you want to try to have a plan with your manager or some expectations around timeline and next steps, so that you can work through it, but so that you can also know what to be doing in addition, maybe outside of the company. And I also will just say, sometimes you don't know what the impact other employees are having. And sometimes that's a good conversation to have with your manager. I'm not saying in the case of your friend, but it can be helpful. Not that your manager should be talking with you about like negative performance elsewhere, but sometimes your manager can help you understand maybe some of the other positive things that other people are doing that is maybe like accelerating their raises and things. And so that you can learn from that and be like, oh, maybe I can do those as well. Or just letting your manager know that you're interested in doing that or being seen for that. And at the end of the day, also getting other offers can be helpful, because sometimes it doesn't materialize and you realize, oh, I'm not ready for that yet. Or like, this is the best I can do.
yeah. Another question is, if you are not happy in the current role, how can you negotiate for a different role within the team or company you work for without offending your manager or lose your job?
I think it's similar. It's a similar strategy to negotiation in the sense that you just want to ask what's possible, and you want to be specific about what you're asking for. One thing I didn't mention, just by the way, about raises, for example, is to say a number. If you are getting to a point where you realize, sometimes when you ask for a raise, it's not just, don't just say, oh, I'm looking for a raise, because sometimes you get like a small amount and then you're still disappointed. Be like, just like in a negotiation where you say, this is what I'm looking for. Is this possible? Be specific with your manager so that they know what to aim for, or so that they can help clarify those expectations. If you're trying to get different responsibilities, a different title, or a different team, and this could be for various reasons. Maybe you just want to be on a different career track. Maybe you're just unhappy where you're at, and you want to be on a different team with a manager who does advocate for you or something. I would say the career track one is maybe the simplest to not offend, because that's just like career track sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, the offending one is kind of, I would say the only difficulty is if you don't like your manager and you don't get on, and you're having issues there. And I would say involve HR. That's what they're there for. If that's happening, you shouldn't have to worry. The idea of worrying about offending someone is either misplaced. Like just remember you can advocate for yourself, and it's okay for you to have goals that are different than other people's. But if there's actually like some animosity or conflict there, talk to HR. Yeah.
The next question is, I recently saw a question on LinkedIn that was, why do women earn less than men in the same positions? And several answers were, women don't know how to say no to the positions that pay little, or they don't know how to negotiate salaries. In your opinion, is that still true?
I mean, I'm only stopping because I do think I think that there are two issues that are still present, which is socialization, which can affect women. It can also affect, people who are just less represented in tech, people of color, people with disabilities. The socialization can be true, but in my experience, that's super easy to learn. Like, honestly, sometimes people, even just hearing these phrases, will write back to me and be like, I used the phrase and it worked, like there's nothing inherent about being a woman that I think impacts this, just the socialization and the knowledge. There is also how people are seen, that I think that, is there like bias and that sort of thing. I do think companies will sometimes, so that can vary. I guess what was the question specifically? Just like, I forgot.
Yeah. So the question is, it's about that women earn less than men, and women don't know how to say no to positions that pay little, or don't know how to negotiate salaries. Is that still true?
I guess I don't know. I'll say a lot of the people I work with are largely women or people of color, and they do great, and they're super,
Okay.
like, yeah. So I don't know.
Okay,
Next question.
Okay. Yes, let's go to the next. What would be your advice if I'm looking to ask for a raise or promotion, but there's a company restructure and you're switched to a new manager and you don't have a previous relationship to base your conversation on?
Oh, that's so frustrating. The moving to managers. By the way, consider that this also can happen when you switch jobs, that you have to rebuild all of that reputation. All those great performance reviews, those don't come with you. And that's one thing to think about when you're working at a job is, is there anything, every 6 months, think about what you've been able to celebrate and what you can put on your, LinkedIn or your resume, just so you don't forget. But this is something I've been thinking, later in my career, I really started to think about. This is actually why I went into starting to give talks and things, because I was like, everything I'm doing is so private. And when I switch companies, I have to start all over again. And so sometimes thinking about what you can do outside of your company can, I don't know, that can be helpful. In terms of what specifically to do when you change managers. One is, and by the way, is for an internal situation like this, is to print out your performance reviews or have a summary of your, I hope that horns, you can't hear all that honking. Okay.
No.
Never. I'll just keep going. Is to try to have some things that are written. You can have like the raw material, like, printed or saved somewhere. But also maybe just like a summary, just like, a one pager. So when you meet your new manager, you can say, you get to know them. And if maybe they don't realize they need to do this, they might not be thinking about it, but you bring up in those first few conversations about, here's, you can tell them it's really important to me that you get to know me and my, my, it's not even just my experience at this company, but just like where, my contributions here and where I'm at, so that you can kind of run through that. Like basically your new manager doesn't even get to interview you, right? like if it were a new job. So they can like, sometimes the misunderstandings can be really, really crappy. And like, sometimes they're because of stereotypical reasons or like whatever. Right. So yeah, make sure that you get to like a one pager sort of things that you can go through with them. But, and also just very specifically, you can say, look, these were the conversations I was having with my manager. This was the plan that we had, or the timeline, or the open questions. And I'd really like to work with you on those next steps. See what they, you can always, you're always asking with managers as a partnership, get their thoughts on how this would work and that sort of thing. But again, just because a company seems to be going through whatever, that 100% does not mean that you don't have, you shouldn't ask, or you should, whatever. You still can get to continue to have your career progression regardless of the market. That's not your problem. You're not the finance person. Maybe you're the finance person. That's a different, we'll skip that. Next question.
Yeah. When negotiating internally, can you mention that you are aware of what others are being paid compared to what you are being paid without mentioning names?
Yeah, sure. And this is, again, I mean, sometimes it is actually useful to look at your employment contract, like to really read all the fine print. There's again, on one of those videos I had about talking about past pay, this is actually, there's actually laws about this where companies cannot prevent employees from talking to each other within a company. They can prevent you from talking about it publicly, or to others, which is that maybe that's reasonable or not. But I'm pretty sure even regardless of the state you're in, they can't like fire you for talking amongst yourselves. It's been a while since I've made that video, a few years, so I need to go check on that link. But that's something worth looking into. So, I am not a lawyer, and I need to review the notes on this, but I definitely, just from a general cultural point of view, I think if you have a good relationship with your manager, I've never seen that to be a problem, to say this is what I've heard. And, you don't want to make it sound like you're doing all this, you don't want to make it sound like you're a troublemaker, but just like, hey, this kind of slipped and I've heard some of these things. Can we talk about this? I think I'm concerned, or I'd like to understand more. I think that's a great conversation to have.
Okay. The next one is, how do you negotiate for a promotion, assuming you're deserving?
How do you negotiate for a promotion?
Mm-hmm.
Those are, I would say, even easier than asking for a raise, in the sense that you don't have to worry about it, being just about money. It's like, those are legit. Those are often based on specific responsibilities, specific ways that you're contributing or want to contribute. And so, again, ideally, this is an early conversation that you've had with your manager, where from the get-go, here's what my objectives are, here's what the expectations are, and that you're meeting or even exceeding them, and how that sort of work, and you've talked with them about how it works. So sometimes managers want you to, okay, before you start managing a team, they want to see you kind of leading a project, or doing, maybe mentoring an intern, or, they want to see you kind of, in the case of becoming like a first-time manager, they want to see you doing some of the things before you then officially get it. And I think that's, that's certainly how things often work. So ideally, you just sort of, about that, and you're working towards it, and you might even have a timeline. The manager might say, yes, this is probably going to take a year, or let's reevaluate in 3 months at the, the performance cycle. Like, kind of different situations. Or yeah, it kind of really depends, but it just has to be a plain conversation. So it's never too late to open that door. What you don't want to do is like work really hard for a year and, heads down, trying to do all this great stuff. And then at the end say, wait, where's my medal?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen unless your manager knows, and they usually need to know ahead of time.
Yeah. The next one is, do you have any tips for negotiations during annual performance evaluations?
I think I kind of addressed this one. Do it sooner than later. Don't wait for the last conversation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, better late than never. And, maybe something can happen, and worst case, if it doesn't happen now, okay, what about the next performance review? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let me check if There is one question: how does a negotiation change for a contractor, as there is less investment into the employment from the start?
Yeah. This changes also if you're like a full-time contractor versus like a freelancer, where maybe you have different clients and opportunities. Because then that can, that once you start to have more eggs in your basket, that sort of leverage, like if you start to see that when you bring on new clients, sometimes you can raise your rates with a new client, and then you go to your old clients, and at some point you have to have that conversation. You say, you know what, my rates have actually raised, and based on how much, whether you're okay losing them or whatever, you kind of figure that all out. Whereas if this is essentially your one job, but you're just a contractor instead of an employee, yeah, you have even less leverage. I mean, at least as an employee, they often have to at least do some kind of, like they can't just fire you like randomly. Sometimes with contractors, you have much less protection. Again, it's just going to be a conversation you're going to have. You may not even get performance reviews if you're a contractor. So it really is really based on your conversations. And sometimes there it is easier to, yeah, it kind of depends on the specifics, but, try to be strategic and keep other opportunities available, as a way to kind of figure some of this out. That can help.
Yeah. This question, Lusen, I'll read it out so you can maybe share some tips with this person.
Sure.
How do I make a good relationship with a manager if I'm an introvert? Also, what do I do in case of an environment where people point out your weakness in front of managers?
Oh, first of all, that's so, in both of these cases, I think you're doing nothing wrong or nothing unusual. Like I don't know, tons of people are introverts and they have great relationships with managers. Maybe your manager is an introvert even. It's like I give all these talks, and yet in many ways I'm an introvert. I think the tip, I don't even think it matters whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I mean, maybe what you're saying is if you are really shy, I mean, if you're having trouble talking with your manager, you might want to get get professional coaching, or take classes, or you might want to directly work on that kind of kind of thing. Like if you're having a great amount of anxiety, talking with your manager, whether it's anxiety or you don't know what to say, so like maybe work through that with a professional. And I'm not therapist is one idea, but I was actually thinking like a coach. Like lots of professionals have coaches. I think it's money well spent. I've been a coach. Practicing these sorts of things can be really helpful. But just in terms of general tips, I mean, your manager is just a person. Like you could be a manager one day, right? They just have information that you don't have. They probably have experience that you don't have, or insider information. And so I would say just be curious and ask questions, so that you can learn. And that's one of the easiest ways to start getting sort of mentored by them. I guess I would have to know the specific issue you're having. Yeah,
Okay.
to know
Yeah.
what the tip would be for this. But forming a good relationship, here's the one thing I would say is try to have weekly meetings. Some managers don't want to waste your time, or maybe they're just busy, and advocate for yourself. You deserve frequent meetings or regular meetings, maybe not weekly. Personally, though, the best way to form a good relationship is to have regular and frequent conversations. And so make that happen in whatever that best means for you in the situation. But like, honestly, a weekly one-on-one to me is totally fine and really helpful. And that could help you kind of, keep asking for these things. Sometimes managers, whether it's because they're busy or they don't know better, or they think they're wasting your time, like don't invest enough time in those conversations, or in, actually writing out a spreadsheet of SMART goals or whatever. Like if they're just sort of an absentee manager, ask for time and just make that happen.
Okay.
They'll just say no, right? It's not your fault if they don't want to do it.
So, Lusen, any closing comments or thoughts for the audience?
Thank you. I just, you can do it. Thank you so much for these great questions, Anita. Thank you for helping me through those. Everyone, advocate for yourself. You deserve it. And I wish you the best of luck. Let me know how it goes. And if you have any other questions, you can email me at lusen@candidateplanet.com. I think all of this these slides will be shared afterwards. So good luck out there. You can do it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.